Today on Stronger Than Reason, we get topical with the 1989 album by Jello Biafra with DOA, Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. So before we get started today, I want to issue a disclaimer. This is necessarily a political episode due to the subject matter. I'm going to talk frankly about American politics, so if you're uncomfortable with that, turn this off now and go do something else. I completely understand that some people listen to podcasts as an escape. I do the same thing. I need humor podcasts now more than ever just to maintain my sanity. But there comes a time when anyone with a microphone, anyone with a platform, no matter how small, has to speak up. In the case of Stronger Than Reason, the best way for me to do this is to discuss a particular album that came out in 1989, and it's always been a favorite of mine. It was a pointed and political album when it came out, and unfortunately I find it just as relevant today, if not more so. I can't properly discuss it without also discussing politics. It's an album that does have some humor, albeit very dark humor, so there might be a laugh or two in this episode, but make no mistake, there will be politics, and there's not a lot of good things to say about it. So I warn you, if you don't want to hear that from me, you're welcome to turn this off right now. Consider this a trigger warning. And I'll tell you something else. This is not going to be a debate. I'm not going to entertain trolls. At the end of the day, this is my channel, this is my show, and I will judiciously weed out comments that, in my opinion, are not helpful or insightful or in good faith. If you don't like that, too bad. Start your own show. I can't say it's a free country anymore, but you can certainly still start your own show. So, okay. Those are the preliminaries. Consider yourself disclaimed. In 1978, a guy named Raymond Pepperell put an ad in the San Francisco magazine The Recycler looking for bandmates. Bassist Jeffrey Leal replied, as did a vocalist named Eric Boucher. These three guys, along with a Spinal Tap-like rotating cast of drummers, would go on to make punk history. In fact, they'd become one of the first hardcore punk bands, espousing musicality, but differentiating themselves largely due to Boucher's quick wit, sarcasm, astute grasp of politics, and penchant for biting satire. Thanks to his lyrics, they would become one of the first punk bands to make sophisticated statements about America's politics, foreign policy, and consumer culture. They all picked stage names because that was the punk thing to do. So Raymond Pepperell became East Bay Ray, Jeffrey Leal became Klaus Fluoride, and Eric Boucher became Jello Biafra, a name that would become notorious, but which was brilliant in how it perfectly encapsulated the band's criticism of U.S. culture by juxtaposing Jello, the brand name of a mass-produced, unhealthy, and frankly nasty dessert treat, with Biafra, a short-lived West African nation that seceded from Nigeria from 1966 to 1970, and which suffered an awful famine due to an ongoing civil war. The fact that the U.S. was selling a product like Jello amidst such starvation really said everything that Jello himself wanted to say about the state of the world and the U.S.'s place in it. That the U.S. was too focused on consumer culture and its own entertainment to take much of a stance against human suffering or problems outside its own borders. Now, to be clear, that point wasn't new or novel. Frank Zappa had been making it for decades, as did George Carlin, as did earlier punk bands, I'm sure. After all, the goal of punk was to turn your back on consumer culture, to make your own culture, to grab the reins, as it were, and not feed the corporate beast. But these guys in this new punk band drove that point home more forcefully than anyone else in the music scene. And just to be sure that they didn't pass by unnoticed, they decided to name themselves the Dead Kennedys. Now, for those who aren't aware, the Kennedys are one of America's most prominent, aka richest, political families, and they produced our country's 35th president, John F. Kennedy, who of course was assassinated in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Now, his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, who had served as his attorney general, decided to run for president in 1968. He too was assassinated that year, and of course the Democratic nomination went instead to Hubert Humphrey, who lost in the general to Richard Nixon. Now, John and Robert had a younger brother, Edward, or Teddy, who almost did himself in at Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts in 1969 by driving a car off a bridge. He narrowly escaped, but his passenger was killed, and it threw his family's bad luck into the spotlight once again. Now, Jello said in an interview that the name of his band wasn't meant to be a slap at the family, so much as a criticism of the mythology that had grown around them. In a 1980 interview, he speculated, though, that the Kennedy religion had already been supplanted by worship of Elvis Presley. In general, the name, though, is a jab at anointed American royalty, which you can apply to today's situation, I think, without a lot of imagination. So the Dead Kennedys were active from 1978 to their first dissolution in 1986. During that time, they released 4 full-length albums and 1 EP and a variety of live albums and compilations. On most of these releases, they were joined by the drummer Darren Henley, a.k.a. D.H. Peligro, a gent who, strangely enough, was briefly a member of the Red Hot Chili Peppers after the departure of their original drummer, Jack Irons, and before the arrival of Chad Smith. So the lineup with Biafra, Ray, Fluoride, and Peligro would be considered the classic Dead Kennedys lineup. Jello's spicy songwriting and the band's blistering chops would produce such classics as California Uber Alles, Holiday in Cambodia, Kill the Poor, Nazi Punks Fuck Off, Jocko-Rama, Soup is Good Food, and, of course, MTV Get Off the Air. Was I a Dead Kennedys fan? Sure, but I never actually owned any of their music for whatever reason. Mostly I listened to them when driving around in friends' cars. We all love Jello's crazy sense of humor and the band's aggression. I mean, what's not to like? So much as with his name, Jello would routinely juxtapose American trash culture with real-world problems, just to point out how out of touch the country was and how misplaced were our values. Now, you might ask, was he doing this because he hated America? I don't think so. I think the guy is just an iconoclast. He's like a court jester. It's literally his job to point out the absurdities of the world. Again, he's in the same tradition as Zappa and Carlin. In fact, Jello was an acquaintance of Zappa's, as evidenced by his getting name-checked in the Real Frank Zappa book, which I talked about in episode 49. Much like Zappa, Jello didn't just critique politics. He participated. He ran for mayor of San Francisco in 1979, and his platform was fantastic. Banning cars, forcing businessmen to wear clown suits, having elections for police officers, hiring workers who lost their jobs to panhandle in wealthy neighborhoods, legalizing squatting, and putting statues of Dan White in parks, then letting the Park Service sell eggs and tomatoes so people could throw them at the statues. Now, Dan White, if you recall, was a conservative city supervisor who had murdered 2 more liberal supervisors, George Moscone and Harvey Milk. It was a despicable act that resulted in the so-called White Riots. The cover of the Kennedys' first album, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, depicts burning police cars from that riot. Anyway, Jello lost to Dianne Feinstein, who was already pushing 50 at the time, and of course she'd go on to become a senator and cling to power until her death in 2023 at the age of 90. A classic example of elderly Democrats' tendency to wear out their welcome. In a way, though, Jello had already won because as a legal candidate, he had been granted equal media time, which he used to great effect. The Dead Kennedys were also notorious for their 1986 obscenity trial, which was sparked by the Parents Musical Resource Center, or PMRC. Just get a load of them. This was a non-governmental organization of senators' wives led by Tipper Gore, who took it upon themselves to censor musicians. Now, when Frank Zappa testified to Congress in September 1985, it was to speak out against the PMRC and their self-appointed role of arbiter of good and bad music. Despite Zappa's efforts, the PMRC persisted and in 1986 managed to sue Biafra for distributing harmful material to minors, specifically a poster of the painting Landscape 20 Penis Landscape as painted by the Swiss artist H.R. Giger, who of course was already very well known for the unique creature and set design in the wildly successful Alien film series. The case resulted in a deadlock and a mistrial, but the damage was done. The legal costs drove the dead Kennedys to disband, so maybe it was the PMRC's goal all along. Jello, however, wasn't daunted. Much like Henry Rollins, see episode 85, Jello would embark on a successful second act as a spoken word artist. He'd regularly tour and record his own shows, which he'd put out on his label, Alternative Tentacles, which of course released all of the Dead Kennedys material and stuff by like-minded bands, including the Butthole Surfers, 7 Seconds, No Means No, Subhumans, Half Japanese, Wesley Willis, and DOA. He'd also start collaborating with other musicians, and some of these were one-off tracks on this album or that album. Some were one-off albums, and some, like Lard, which he did with Ministry's Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker, would become full-fledged projects in their own right. For more on Lard, see episode 23. The full-length album collabs are, to me, the most interesting of his work, and of these he did The Sky is Falling and I Want My Mommy with No Means No, Tumor Circus with Steel Pole Bathtub, and the album he made with DOA. That is the album I want to talk about today, the one that is relevant to our current political situation. And here is that album, Jello Biafra with DOA, Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. Did you get that? It's called Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. So folks, the facts of the matter are this, and I'm just going to give you some objective truths. The fact is, we now live in a country that has concentration camps. That's what the so-called alligator Alcatraz is. It's a concentration camp for people the government has declared undesirable, which, strangely enough, are brown, black, and poor people, some of whom are not legal citizens, but some who are. The fact is, many of these people were nabbed off the streets by masked ICE agents acting in the role of secret police. These agents did not produce identification. They did not read anyone their Miranda warning. They did not show warrants. They did not produce charges. There was no habeas corpus. There was no due process at all. They took these people off the streets, and now they're holding them in a concentration camp in Okeechobee, Florida, a facility that is run by contractors, not government employees. So right away, you know someone's making money off of it. And here we have people with no criminal records and ankle and hand chains, no air conditioning, crammed into cages. The fact is, these are Latinos and Haitians. There are no white people there. They're specifically targeting people of color. So let's call this what it is, ethnic cleansing. We now live in a country where it's okay to drag people off the street with no charges and no due process simply because of how they look and throw them in a cage with no legal justification or recourse. The fact is, folks, this was never okay in the America I grew up in. We had a rule of law, and while we often fell short, we were starting to become a nation that valued civil rights, as evidenced by the leadership of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who, last I checked, was still honored by a national holiday. The America I grew up in had Lady Liberty as a symbol, not just for white America, but for anyone in the world who wanted freedom. There's actually text on the Statue of Liberty. Some of you may know it. It's a poem called The New Colossus. It's a statement, a declaration for what Lady Liberty literally stands for. Let me remind you what it says. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Did you hear that? Did you get that? So now in today's version of America, this bizarro America, the tiled, huddled masses yearning to breathe free are in a concentration camp on American soil. A concentration camp. I'm only speaking facts here, folks. This is not opinion or spin. This is not propaganda. The fact is that America is now filling concentration camps. In some cases, we've also sent these undesirables like Abrego Garcia to third world prisons without due process, which is supposedly guaranteed by the Constitution. Do you remember the Constitution? The document that's supposedly the supreme law of the land? The law that all of our elected federal officials swear an oath to protect and defend? If you think what is going on is okay or cute or funny, I suggest you read the Constitution because it's not okay, it's not cute, it's not funny. The fact is it's wrong, it's un-American, and per the Constitution, it's illegal. Now, we all know the real driving force for this madness isn't the president. He's just a passive enabler in this case. The real driving force is another guy, an advisor to the president, who is a white supremacist and who has no morals and no compunction about ethnic cleansing. He's been given a free rein to pursue his fascist, racist agenda of making America white again. Contrary to the better angels like MLK, John Lewis, Abraham Lincoln, and Lady Liberty. So this lunatic is driving the car, but, the president is allowing it on his watch because the fact is he doesn't care about the rule of law or civil rights. Ladies and gentlemen, as a great man once said, with the presidency, the buck stops here. So our president remains ultimately responsible. Now, everything I've said to this point is just straight facts, folks. I know no one cares about facts anymore. No one believes in objective reality. But these are facts, and the truth is horrifying. And I get that some people might not want to face it, might not want to admit that they've hooked their wagon to lies. They might want to put their head in the sand and say, well, it isn't affecting anyone I know. I'm still going to work and buying crap on Amazon and taking vacations. But here's the thing. Because the government is now operating this way, because we've thrown our values away, our moral high ground, our aspirations to be the land of the free and to provide liberty and justice for all, and because we no longer believe that it's self-evident that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because we've left all that lefty garbage on the side of the road, all of our core values as enshrined in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and yes, even the Pledge of Allegiance, all that stuff that prior to now has been the core of our American identity, the fact is, we're all in danger. The problem is that we now have a government that's declared war on the other, on people who are less than, as Trent Reznor told us. But who is that exactly? Well, that's the problem. It's whoever they decide it is. Today, it's brown, black, and poor people, immigrants, those tired and huddled masses who came here following Lady Liberty's welcoming light, only to find that it was a tiki torch held by some stupid racist. But tomorrow, who knows who it's going to be? Who's going to get targeted next? This country does have a history of vilifying just about every demographic at one time or another. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter. Irish, Italian, Polish, Slovak. At one point or another, we were all less than. And you know what? You could be again just like that. What kills me, though, is that some people defending this seem to think they're more American than others. Oh, really? You're more American. As if you, your grandparents, or some ancestor down the line wasn't an immigrant themselves? that for whatever reason your ancestors didn't come here seeking a better life for themselves? The fact is, folks, unless you are 100% Native American, you have no right to call yourself more American than anyone else. Newsflash, the United States is a nation of immigrants. We're all immigrants, or children or grandchildren of immigrants. You know, back in my childhood, we were proud to call America a melting pot. I used to watch Schoolhouse Rock as a kid. Do you remember their song for the Great American Melting Pot? I suggest you go back and watch it. It's shocking how far we've fallen in my lifetime. The fact is, this country is a blend of all sorts of nationalities, colors, creeds, and beliefs, composed of everyone who came here from other places, plus the Native Americans, who as of the 2020 census accounted for just 2.09% of all American citizens. So that means there's a 97.8% chance that you or your ancestors immigrated here, that you directly or indirectly benefited from a more generous, inclusive America that gave your ancestors a path to citizenship. Of course, they might have gotten some side-eye or persecution when they stepped off the boat, but the fact that you're here now proves that they were able to establish a home here. Personally, I think this blend of cultures is what has traditionally made America strong. Consider steel. You know, the U.S. Northeast here used to be a big producer of steel. So what is steel? Did you ever think about it? It's a mixture of two different substances, iron and carbon. Both are pure chemical elements. Nothing more pure than a chemical element. But when merged, they become this new thing called steel that is stronger than either of the two pure ingredients. And to me, that's America. We're strong primarily due to our diversity, which has been far and above what you find in most other countries. It's given Americans a unique perspective, especially those living in cities where you brush up against all sorts of people in close proximity. It's given us a tolerance, or it used to new ideas, a bigger pool of viewpoints to draw from. We are essentially a strong alloy made by combining all these different cultures and mixing them up in a way and at a scale that isn't really found elsewhere in the world. Our diversity has made us unique. And the one thing that has helped all these different communities excel and contribute is our lingua franca, not English, but science. The U.S.'s embrace of science, especially in the 20th century, improved not only our economy and technological achievements, but also our standard of living, our healthcare, our life expectancy, our environment. And most importantly, science helped this country become a stable platform where people could reliably live, thrive, and become their best selves. Science has historically helped us transform the world with medicine, transportation, communication, safety, comfort, and education. So what is this administration doing? They've obviously turned their backs on science. They're dismantling the Department of Education, defunding research centers. They are lobotomizing America. They want everyone as dumb as they are. They installed a conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. They've cut Medicaid services. They have these ridiculous tariffs that are driving up inflation, driving down the dollar, and making America a laughingstock, a pariah of international trade. You know, the Onion is practically out of business, folks, because you couldn't make this more of a joke. This administration wants you dumb, sick, and working 80 hours a week to afford basic necessities. Just forget the American dream. They have flushed it completely down the toilet. And why? To give tax breaks to billionaires, to give more money to the people who need it least. As Jello Biafra himself says, when will you wake up, America? When will you folks who voted for this wake up and realize this guy is picking your pocket and the pockets of all your kids and grandkids for generations to come? Is it really worth it to you because he's deporting brown people? Are you willing to take this shot in the nuts because you know it'll hurt people you hate even more? And if so, you are truly sick and need to sit down and examine your priorities and ask yourself why you're so full of hate. After all, you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants, maybe one generation, maybe more, but there's a very good chance that you're standing where you are thanks to an immigrant. So now a big chunk of these children of immigrants want to pull up the ladder. They want to suddenly declare that America is closed. Sorry, but the experiment is over. Give me a freaking break. These people are massively entitled Karens, regardless of gender. They are entitled Karens who are saying, F you, I got mine. Well, folks, that is un-American. At least it was in the America I grew up in. It's not in accord with our nation's historical values of being a land of the free with liberty and justice for all, of welcoming huddled masses and the wretched refuse of your teeming shore led by Lady Liberty's light. So what's happening now, and this isn't talked about a whole lot, it's an attempted rebranding of America, which Jello astutely described in Ministries in case you didn't feel like showing up during his flag pledge, as a nation that provides liberty and justice to all who can afford it, a nation that's closed its borders, that's hoarding its wealth, it's not interested in compassion, empathy, mercy, generosity, kindness, or peace. You know, the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, verses 3 to 12, that so many of these so-called Christians are called by Jesus to espouse. Wasn't it Jesus who said, love thy neighbor as you yourself wish to be loved? And whatever happened to that golden rule, people? These fake Christians make me sick, the ones who wave scripture around as a way to justify their hate, as a way to draw a boundary between us and them, and to vilify the other. Now, I'm no theologian, Lord knows, but I'm pretty sure Jesus was down with the so-called dregs of society, you know, your basic tax collectors, prostitutes, and lepers. In Matthew 25, Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, the moral of which was, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. You so-called Christians who are cheering on Alligator Auschwitz, who do you think he means by the least of these? Now, this isn't a trick question. He meant the people that ICE is targeting, among others, brown, black, and poor people, Mexicans, Latinos, refugees, people fleeing persecution in their own countries. So if you really had Christian faith, you'd be screaming for justice for these poor people, not enabling the current administration's awful behavior. To those folks, I implore you to read your Bible if you can read, if you haven't already burned or banned all the books in your community. I urge everyone, though, to read your Constitution. It's patently obvious what's going on is illegal. But does anyone care? Does it matter? Do you care that this administration has violated the Posse Comitatus Act by deploying the U.S. military against its own citizens in Los Angeles? Are you sitting smugly at home, enjoying watching the chaos on the news, entertained by the misery of others, by the spectacle, by the cruelty against people you secretly or openly hate? Is owning the libs more important than your own welfare? It's real smart. Well, to everyone who's enabling this, I can only say karma is a bitch. As you know, what comes around goes around, and I guarantee that one of two things is going to happen here. There will be a change of power, a restoration of America's true values, followed by a reckoning. Think Nuremberg trials. When this happens, wouldn't you rather be on the right side of history? Or the alternative. Someday, the Gestapo is going to show up on your doorstep, or the doorstep of someone you do care about. Someday you will be the other because of the color of your skin, or the way you speak, or the way you worship or choose not to worship, or because of who you love or how you vote. Sooner or later, you will get dragged to Alligator Auschwitz, or maybe to the Denver Dachau, or the Boston Buchenwald. Rest assured, if you are not one of the estimated 2,101 billionaires in this country, then congrats, you too have a target on your back as big as the target on any immigrant. You better believe it's just a matter of time before the face-eating leopards turn to you or someone you love and say, wow, that looks tasty. So mark my words, one of two ways. Either we turn this around or we're all sunk. That, my friends, is stone-cold truth you can take to the bank. And to anyone who's crying, it's un-American to speak out against our leaders, give me a freaking break. I bet you kept real quiet under Obama, right? Yeah? And under Biden, you really held your tongue, huh? What a joke. So there's nothing more American, folks, than standing up against abusive authority. Our country was founded on it, in the revolution. It's the reason we fought in and helped win 2 world wars. Our grandparents and great-grandparents fought in World War II against fascists, against the Nazis, who thought they were the chosen ones and that everyone else should be gotten rid of. How do you think those World War II vets would like alligator Auschwitz? We're shitting on their legacy, the legacy of the greatest generation, a generation that were Antifa in the most pure sense. And consider this, if you are anti-Antifa, that makes you fa. That makes you for fascists. So yeah, given a choice between fascism and Antifa, you should be Antifa all the way. Duh! This is elementary logic, people. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult. All right, we've gotten away from the music here. I realize that, and that's why I wanted to warn you about it up front. Again, I feel strongly that at this point, anyone with a microphone and a conscience has got to say something. So I'm saying it. And it's not because I'm a member of one party or another. These are conclusions anyone can reach with a little bit of critical thinking, something that is woefully lacking around here today. Instead of critical thinking, everyone is just choosing sides and believing what they're told. Here's my advice. Unplug your phone. Get off social media. Read as many news sources as you can and listen critically to what journalists are saying. Listen to what journalists outside the U.S. have to say. You know, those with a somewhat more objective viewpoint. As an American, you should be embarrassed by what's going on because it is, in fact, embarrassing. It pains me to see the country I love taking such horrendous missteps, vacating its position as a world leader, a position that China and Russia are only too happy to fill. But hey, it's what you all voted for. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you're enjoying the higher prices, national debt, and erosion of your rights. All of this, and I didn't even mention Jeffrey Epstein until now. So if the shuck and jive about Epstein, the desperate attempts to keep us from asking questions about Epstein, if that doesn't wake you up to the fact that this administration is totally full of shit and has been feeding you a line all along, then there really is no help for you. So let's get back to this album, Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. 35 years old and still on point. We talked about Jello and the Dead Kennedys, but let's talk about DOA for a second. Who are DOA? I had no idea back in the day other than I knew they were some punk band. Turns out they're from Canada, Vancouver specifically. And much like the Dead Kennedys, were one of the seminal hardcore punk bands from back in the day. They had a much varied lineup over the years, but as of this recording, they were Joey Keithley and Chris Proham on guitar, Brian Goebel on bass, and John Card on drums. Now, this record was engineered by Jello and a guy named Cecil English, who I can find very little info about. But let me tell you, the production on this album is outstanding. It's tight and punchy. In a way, I consider this an unofficial third Lard LP. It's that good. The fact that it is in the same ballpark as a Luxapan production speaks volumes. Now, here's the thing. My friends and I were so enamored of this album that we went out and bought some DOA records, but they did not sound like this one. Those records were much more generic punk with worse production, so that was a disappointment. We were also inspired to pick up the collab with No Means No, but with a similar result. So it seems this record was a high water mark for our personal tastes. Just sounds awesome. The band is rocking as one. They are super tight, playing like they're possessed. Now, this CD I have is actually a 2024 reissue from Alternative Tentacles, because I only ever had a cassette dub of this record for years, and it came with a sticker on the shrink wrap that quoted Jello as saying, "Talk about a wall of sound. One of the best things DOA or I ever did." And I wholeheartedly agree with that. As amazing as the Dead Kennedys' body of work is, it never really hit as hard as this. Lard did, but I assume that's why Jello qualified his statement by saying one of the best things I ever did. So the cover art is kind of hard to describe. It's a horse-drawn chariot pulling a line of old-timey cars and another chariot attacking a modern tank in what looks like the Roman Colosseum under a meteor storm. So I don't know what's implied here, but the cover art is entitled Life as We Know It, and it's by Winston Smith, of course, who often worked with Jello. And the back cover is also by Smith. It's featuring 3 old men picking dollar bills from a tree and putting them in bushel baskets. And this one is called The Money Tree. Good stuff. The fine print here is really funny, too. It gives special thanks to Dan Quayle, the former vice president, for guidance and inspiration, and to the Alternative Tentacle staff for helping to keep corporate rock from destroying what's left of so-called alternative music. Of course, there's also a booklet inside with all of Jello's lyrics, so you can read them and sing along. This is a super short album. It's just slightly under a half an hour, so it's very, very punk in that way. It's really kind of an EP. It's got just 6 tracks. The first is called That's Progress, and it's a sardonic look at gentrification, industrialization, and surveillance culture. It starts off with Jello doing an ironic cheerleader bit, and then the song kicks in and kind of hits you like a roundhouse punch. And it doesn't let up. It goes right into Attack of the Peacekeepers, skewering NATO's nation building and general ineptitude, and then right into Wish I Was in El Salvador, another number that resonates today, but for different reasons, given the current regime's illegal use of El Salvador as a modern American gulag vis-a-vis Abrego Garcia, a man who committed no crimes, but who was sent to an El Salvadorian prison due to an administrative mistake. This song paints a picture of how the military and law enforcement tend to attract violent sociopaths. You might think the next song, Power is Boring, is going to be a slow one based on how it starts, but after the sedate kind of intro becomes another bone crusher. The lyrics have to do with the irony of power causing alienation, and it manages to tell this story in 3 different scenarios: political dictatorship, corporate life, and the music industry. Pretty good for a song that is under 3 minutes long. And then it goes into a pretty rockin' and groovy cover of the Animals' We Gotta Get Out of This Place. This is the one tune here that Jello actually sings. Of course, the original was adopted as an anti-war song by American GIs in Vietnam, so it fits right into the anti-authoritarian bent of this record. This is a faithful cover with an absolutely great bass line. It is the first track here to crack 4 minutes, and it gives the band a little space to kind of stretch out with some nice guitar work in between the verses. Just a really excellent version of this song. But they save the best for last with track 6, Full Metal Jack-Off, a 13-plus minute riff extravaganza. It's practically half of this entire album. Now, Jello might have gotten the idea for this track from The Power of Lard, which came out the previous year in 1989, since that EP had just 3 tracks: The Power of Lard and Hell Fudge, which were both quite short, and Time to Melt, which was a half hour long. However, Time to Melt is straight up sludge rock. It's, either 90 BPM or 45 BPM, depending on how you count it. But Full Metal Jack-Off is a much peppier 130 BPM, and it's got just the most infectious guitar rhythm groove ever. It's just an amazing track. This is the song that you really want to blast out of super powerful speakers, not just listen to it on headphones. It's a song you should share with others. But the lyrics are, who really cares? The music is so good. But the lyrics are about the futility of the war on drugs, more specifically, the U.S. government's complicity in fostering it to the detriment of poor minorities, pursuing the war on drugs to encourage racism and to profit from the prison industrial complex, inching us towards a full-on police state. Does any of this still sound familiar? Ring any bells? It's completely relevant today. Now, this song might be the greatest thing that Jello's ever done, in my opinion. It's just a masterpiece. A friend of mine says there hasn't been a week since 1990 that he hasn't listened to this song, and I can see why. It's a banger. It's a great song to drive to, and it's a great song to call out authoritarian bullshit, which is rampant in the U.S. today, as I've described at some length. So there you have it, 6 songs, just 29 minutes and change of pure rage. Maybe the most power per minute of any album I own. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. Maybe, like me, it'll give you some catharsis, a way to blow off some steam. But you might ask, what is Jello up to today? Well, I haven't kept up with him too much. I know in 2022, like many people, he started a podcast, as everyone does sooner or later. His podcast is called Renegade Roundtable, and his first guest on the very first episode was Mr. Al Jorgensen. In that episode, they talked about the possibility of a new Lard album, which they have done over and over from time to time. But I haven't heard a peep about it since. Anyway, there are 36 episodes so far. I'd say roughly one a month. Many of these are What Would Jello Do episodes, where he addresses a particular political point. But he's not terribly active given the state of the world. He's had just one episode out since the inauguration. But you know what? Jello is 67. He's getting up there. We shouldn't necessarily look to him to be leading any sort of political fight these days. That was his role in the 80s. And yeah, sure, I know Bernie Sanders is still fighting the good fight at 83, and good for him. But everyone's different. Jello's primarily been active through his band, the Guantanamo School of Medicine. They released 5 albums between 2009 and 2020. And he's released 9 spoken word albums between 99 and 2006. One thing you'll quickly realize listening to these, as well as listening to his podcast, is how intelligent he is, how he is able to unpack his thoughts in a logical, coherent way, one idea leading smoothly to another, and also just how articulate he is, that he's able to express himself without a lot of pauses or ums or ahs or so on, something I could certainly learn from. But then what you can't achieve extemporaneously, you can always make up for with good editing. Now, I don't know if he's active on social media because I'm not active on social media, at least not the type where you follow or friend individual people. So for all I know, he's on X tweeting away or whatever you call it, but somehow I doubt it. I do consider this album to fit right into the Lard canon, though, even though it's not a Luxapan joint. It has the same general feel and is maybe even a bit more angry, a bit more spiteful, and more aggressive. Lard, after all, has its playful side, its weird side, with songs like Man Goat, for instance. That wouldn't really fit on this album at all. So there you have it, folks, a rare gem from Jello Biafra and DOA, Last Scream of the Missing Neighbors. It's a high watermark for Jello, amidst all his other amazing work, and probably for DOA too, wherever they are these days. It's certainly one I come back to when I need a good blast of righteous finger-pointing anger. So check it out if you haven't already, and blast out your car windows today. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason, either on YouTube or on the podcast platform of your choice, The Show. It's gonna bring it back to music with a concert report. That's right, we recently visited the big city and attended an important event, a ritual, if you will, and I'll be reporting on it right here in the very near future, so stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, folks, I ask that you be kind to each other. Please take care of yourselves. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.